guys, welcome back to the Discipline Life podcast, the place where we talk all about power differential relationships and domestic discipline. I'm Aria, and this is my husband, Coda.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's podcast, we are going to be talking all about obedience and respect and how they relate to one another.
Or do they? Yeah, right.
Well, because I posed the question to Coda this week, I came to him and said, I kind of want to talk about this on the podcast because the question came to me, can a wife respect her husband while also being disobedient? Or can you have obedience without respect?
It's good questions.
So what are your opening thoughts?
I personally think that they go hand in hand. I think obedience is a sign of respect, and lack of obedience is a sign of disrespect. And I'm just going to give that short little answer, and then I'll expand on it after you give yours, maybe. We'll see.
Well, I was going to say, I agree with you that in a healthy dynamic that obedience is an outpouring of respect.
Uh-huh.
So if I respect you as my husband, I respect your position, and I view you as someone who is worthy of my respect, my admiration, then obedience will naturally flow from that. However, can you have a husband who doesn't necessarily have those qualities? Maybe he's not a great leader, or maybe his wife just lacks that ability to respect him naturally. Can she choose obedience even though that
she doesn't respect him?
Even though she doesn't respect him. And I think that is more likely than the other way around, where I have all the respect, I have all the admiration, I respect you as a leader and as a husband and as all of the things, right? But then I choose not to obey you.
Right. Right.
That can happen too, and that's
Yeah.
why we have rules, and that's why we have punishment, and that's why we have reconciliation. But
Yeah.
I think that most often in very well-established relationships and very well-established domestic discipline relationships, it is more likely that the things that are brought to punishment are either genuine mistakes or habits that have not been strongly solidified. It's not deliberate disobedience for the sake of being disobedient.
That's a good point. Yeah, and I guess in that situation, it may depend on the relationship, just like you were saying, because where my mind was when I said that I think they go hand in hand was, I guess I was thinking more about our relationship, because in our relationship, if you were disobedient, it would kind of be a lack of respect for me.
Absolutely.
As the head of our household. And when you do obey, I do feel respected. I do feel that you care and that you honor my authority.
This hasn't happened in a long time, but there has been situations in the past where we have had an argument or had a disagreement, and I have lost temporarily, not overall, not relationship shaking issue lost, but temporarily lost a sense of respect for you. And I do begrudgingly obey because I know
this is the first time I'm hearing about this, people. Just saying.
Because
you're hearing this truly in real time.
Because I know that it's my duty to obey you. It's my duty to follow through with the tasks and the rules that we have established. But I don't want to in that moment because I'm like, but he doesn't care about me, or he doesn't do this, or he doesn't. And there's that lack of respect in the moment.
Right.
That makes obeying really, really difficult. And because I understand the big picture of our relationship and I understand the implications of disobedience, I choose to obey even though I don't really want to.
Right. That makes sense.
Hasn't happened in a really long time, but it has happened in the past.
And as I said, this is good to know because I actually didn't know that. And so, yeah, I think maybe I'd have to backtrack or to rebuttal. Is that the word? Of what I said earlier? Because now that I know that you've followed through with obedience, even though in that moment you're feeling disrespectful or not feeling respect.
Feeling a lack of motivation through my
there you
respect for you.
Then maybe it is possible. So then that brings up the point. Then how then do each of us maybe conduct ourselves when disobedience is happening or lack of disrespect is happening, and how should that be gone about? So since we've determined you can be obedient even when you're feeling disrespected or vice versa.
Well, and I was going to say for myself, the reason I begrudgingly still obey is because I understand that the argument that we had or the disagreement or my hurt feelings, those are all very, very temporary.
True.
And even if we haven't completely worked them out yet, we will.
True again.
But if I use my feelings in that moment to justify behavior that is unbecoming of our relationship, it will cause further issues.
Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
And so if I am not respectful of you, if my attitude is just one of like, I've got to get this done, or, I don't know how to describe it, but if my attitude is poor towards you because I don't necessarily feel that level of respect that I should or normally do.
Right.
If I do the actionable steps of following through with the tasks in order to still be obedient within our dynamic, it makes it a lot easier to work through that small problem and not let it become a bigger problem, because then it's not that initial argument now becomes that initial argument plus the disrespect plus the disobedience. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So then, okay, I'm going to throw another question at you. So if a wife that's listening right now is struggling hears you with that, well, what do you tell her?
Do the things that you have control over. So you have control over your actions. So if you have certain tasks, certain rules to obey, you can still choose to obey those regardless of your husband's actions, attitudes, regardless, right? So do the things you're supposed to do. Control how you approach the situation. You do not have to say every thought that comes into your head. You do not have to communicate every feeling that you feel. Really take a moment to reflect on, do I need to communicate this because it really needs to be worked out? Or is this a thought that I just need to let go?
Good advice.
Because for instance, should I say this?
She got this look on her face just then.
I did. I got this look of like, okay, am I really going to use that as a, but for instance, Coda and I drive very, very differently.
I'm a better driver. No, that would be debatable from my accident and ticket record. So
I just got a really weird look on my face when he said that. It was almost like an uncomfortable grin / grimace where I'm like, "You're a better driver, really?"
She just knew I was being a little silly here.
And so we drive very differently. But if we're in the car together, he is driving. That's just what we do.
Well, and partly it's because, to be fair, I have a little bit of like a health issue where I get car sick for some reason if I'm not driving.
And part of it is that I view it as a way to let you lead in that way.
That's true. Yeah,
it's
that's
a
true
subconscious thing.
Yeah.
So there are times when he is driving that he does things at a pace that I am not super comfortable with. He doesn't speed. It's just more of like he'll turn with not a lot of room, in my opinion. between him and the car that's approaching in that lane. He will park in a way that I'm just like really uncomfortable with because it's a tight fit. There's just different things where I'm just like, and so in those moments, I have to really decide, is this worth saying something, or do I just need to take a breath and just let it go because it doesn't matter?
This is getting into the territory of don't sweat the small stuff kind of
Right.
thing. Are you going to let the small things mess up your relationship?
For instance, I don't know why Home Depot seems to be such a trigger point in our relationship, but I almost get myself in trouble every time we go to Home Depot.
No offense to Home Depot if you're listening. I doubt you are, but just...
And so the last time we went to Home Depot, you pulled into a parking spot and I was like, there are 5 other spots, like 2 cars down. The parking lot is like open, right? But he decided to park in between 2 very large SUVs. We're in a van, so it's not a small car by any means.
It's not like a Toyota Corolla.
Right. And so I was just like, I was so tense because he like pulled into this parking spot. I thought for sure we were going to like scrape a car on the way in, and he could tell that I was irritated and I was slightly angry, but I held my tongue. I didn't say anything.
She did. To your credit, you absolutely did. Absolutely did.
And if I would have allowed my fear, my frustration to get the better of me and have that knee-jerk reaction and let those words come out of my mouth, I would have ended up in trouble.
Yes, you would have. Remember what happened? Do you remember?
Well, I remember we forgot something in the car.
I can't remember what it was, but I said, I'll go get it.
Yeah, you went back to the, like, we got inside and I was like, oh, did you grab whatever it was?
Were we returning something?
No, it was, do you want me to say? I mean, it's kind of a moot point, but if you're curious.
Oh, it was the weed eater.
Yeah, you had brought the empty spool of the weed eater line
That's right,
so that
I was
we
trying
could
to
match.
figure out what the heck we
yeah,
used.
we could match the new one.
Because I'm not like some really handyman guys. I just really am not. I wish
And so
I was.
we forgot it in the car, and you were like, I'll run and grab it. You stay in here. And so I was just kind of looking at their display in the front, kind of staying by the door so that when he came back in, I would be right there. And by the time he came back in, I had just let it go and was fine. But yeah, if I would have let myself have that knee-jerk reaction, I would have ended up in trouble because in that moment, I was not feeling a overwhelming respect and admiration for your position as the dominant husband, leader of our home. There was a, how could he be so stupid to try to pull into this spot when the parking lot is open?
Man,
Would it
I had
kill
no
us
idea this is what you were thinking.
Would it kill us to walk 20 more feet so that we don't risk getting, having an insurance claim?
What I'm hearing is wah, wah, wah. No.
Hey. Those are legitimate concerns. But if I would have done that because I was feeling that lack of respect, it would have created a bigger issue and it would have bled into the rest of our day because there would have been punishment that would have happened. There would have been more conversation around appropriate behavior. There
Yep.
would have been all of these steps that would have had to happen in order to maintain our relationship.
She speaks the truth.
But because I decided that I was going to be obedient to not allowing those behaviors to occur, because that's an obedience too.
Yeah, I would agree.
Holding your tongue, not being actively disrespectful, not allowing your behavior and your words, that is an act of obedience and an act of commitment to your relationship. And because I did those things, we were able to move on and we were able to reconcile our relationship, and I was able to regain that respect for you again.
And to your credit, why I went out, the reason I talk about when I went out to the car is because when I came back, she really had talked herself a little bit off the ledge, and then she mentioned later, what was it that you said? I can't remember exactly what you said, but something like, "Were you proud of me that I controlled myself or whatever?" And I was like, "Yeah." When I was on my way out to the car, I was like, "I hope she gets it together before I get back in."
And that
So,
is a testament to say, acknowledge those times.
yeah,
You could
I did
see
tell you did a good job, though.
after I asked,
Well, good point.
but it goes a really long way. And it would have gone a really long way if you would have just said, "Hey, I know that you were really irritated with me. I could tell, but you controlled yourself, and I'm proud of you for that." That would have gone a long way.
Well, I'm getting a little bit better at that. And I think from the husband side, obviously we just pointed out where I could have done better, paid you a compliment. But one of the things that I think a tendency with husbands is, if you're not careful, you can look at the moment where you're feeling disrespected, or you're thinking, she hasn't disobeyed anything yet, but you're maybe feeling disrespected, because in that moment, when I could feel like she was upset, there was a part of me that was just like, I don't know why she's making such a big deal out of this. Why does she feel the need to disrespect me when I made a decision? But what you have to do is you have to realize that you've got your own, that was you got your ego bruised a little bit in that moment. That's an ego thing. And so what you have to do is you have to step aside a little bit and say, okay, look, maybe I didn't make the very best decision. She's feeling like I maybe disrespected her a little bit. I'm feeling a little disrespected. So the best thing we can do here is try to let cooler heads prevail, especially get myself emotionally under control, so that if she does decide to disobey in this moment for disrespect, I can handle that in a cool, calm way and not let my emotion get the best of me.
I think what you're trying to say,
Yeah, you're good at summing me up a little better for the audience.
is, even though you could tell I was a little irritated and that maybe I was lacking that respect and admiration for you, you were allowing me to process my feelings and judging my behavior, not your perception of how I was feeling.
Yes. Which was then in turn making me feel something that I'm like, wait a minute. Don't allow that to be the case.
So you were allowing my behavior to be the determinant of the next action steps rather than the emotional exchange that we had.
Yes. That was nonverbal, by the way. That was completely, body language and what we sensed, right?
Right. And so what you're saying is like, because in that moment, when you could tell I was kind of irritated, you could have turned to me and been like, "You need to just cut it out right now."
I could have. You're right.
And then that would have...
I thought about that, by the way.
That would have made it very, very difficult for me to control myself.
Yes.
And that probably would have become a bigger argument.
You bet it would. And so one of the things I do a lot, and I don't think Arya even realizes this, because this is the first time I've ever said this. I can't remember what movie it was. Do you remember there was this movie where they would have a scene and then a scene would play out and you'd go, "Oh my gosh, can't believe that happened." And then it would come back and it was just in that person's mind. Do you remember this? Do you remember what movie this was?
Not specifically, but I feel like that's kind of like a cinematic style that's happened in a lot of different movies.
Yeah. But hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. You have a scene that happens and maybe it is a fight between a husband and a wife, and all of a sudden in his mind or in her mind, something happens and you think the scene's playing out that way, and then all of a sudden it flashes back.
You might be thinking of the newest season of Criminal Minds where...
That was one, but I think it was Gone Girl where this happened.
Oh, I haven't seen that in so long.
But you're right. The new Criminal Minds has this in it where the killer, like, morbidly as like in his mind thinking about slashing the throat of somebody, but that's not what happens. But you see it and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe he just did that. And then all of a sudden the camera goes back and no, he was just thinking it. The reason I bring that up is that happens to me a lot, where I play out a scene in my mind and I know Arya well enough that I can go, okay, if I do this,
I'm either going to respond, like, for instance, if you would have
Right.
turned to me and been like, you need to cut it out, I was fine, you know, whatever you were going to say,
right,
I would have either broken down into tears
that played out in my mind. Yep.
or I would have just let you have all of the frustration and anger that I was
Yes.
feeling in that moment.
And that's great that you said that, because that's exactly the scenes that played out in my mind. So what I decided to do is say, I don't like either of those playing out that way. I'm not saying a word. And we're
then
going to walk into the store.
And you really let me either hang myself or walk away in that moment intact.
Right. And that's what I thought. I was like, I'm
Giving-
going to put the ball in her court here. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say a word. I'm
Giving
going to
me
give her the
enough
ball.
rope to hang myself type
Yep.
of thing, where it's like, if I would have just been like, I can't believe you, if I would have said a single word that was disparaging,
Right.
then you would have said you need to cut it out.
Well, because then at that point, I gave you the ball. You crossed the line.
Right.
And I could say, whoa, no, wait a minute. I didn't say anything. You decided to.
Because I'm allowed to be frustrated. I'm allowed to have those
Yes,
knee-jerk
yes, right.
reactions as long as my behavior is reflective of our dynamic,
Right.
even if it's not reflective of my respect for you.
Right.
It's reflective of my respect for our dynamic, and my respect for you will become re-intact as we move past this temporary situation.
Maybe we need to go in more depth in another podcast, but what you brought up was absolutely right. You need to realize that both of you are entitled to your feelings. I don't ever want this to sound like, because Arya will tell you, early on in our marriage, or maybe it was a little later in our marriage too, but we had a time in our marriage where she felt like I didn't want her to have any emotions. Like I felt it was bad to have emotions. It was not. What I realized was, and I think we kind of both had this epiphany moment at the same time, which is what we're talking about. We are feeling people.
we are healing people.
We are
too.
healing people too. We are feeling people. So to deny feelings would be to deny something of yourself. But what my father always used to tell me is your feelings can be wrong. This is something that our society doesn't understand right now. I know you're just laughing because I'm going off on one of those things again.
Not to get political.
I wasn't going to say it this podcast. But we're living in a society that people think because the way they feel something, that means it's true, and that means they have a right to come out and say it. What you just said is exactly what my dad used to say. No, you have a right to feel it. Go ahead and feel it. But that doesn't mean you get to necessarily have the right to go out with the action with it.
Well,
Do you know what I mean?
taking the scenario that I said, talked about, is in that moment, I was playing out all the scenarios of you scraping the car next to us and what the ramifications of that would be, or, you know, someone getting mad because we parked too close to their car. And
Right.
I was playing out all of these probably improbable scenarios in my mind. And so my initial reaction was one of just like heightened
Adrenaline, worry, anxiety,
Right.
all of these things, right?
All of those things that kind of come along with
Right.
that, cortisol response.
Right.
But when you had to run back out to the car, I was just able to take a breath and say, everything was fine. Everything's going to be fine. I don't need to make a big deal out of this.
And see, that's what I was getting at, is that it's okay to feel the way you feel, have those feelings, because someone who is a recovering anger person, right here, me, will tell you that one of the reasons I suffered with that is I was just pushed my feelings down to when then I finally just exploded, right? So I was told, no, you need to feel your feelings. You need to feel those things. Don't push them down. but try to go through a process, even as that you're angry or frustrated or whatever the emotion was, the emotions you just said that you were going through, and try to go through a process of, okay, like just like you said you did when I left the store. We're in the store. It's okay. Everything turned out fine. We're going to be okay, kind of thing. And honestly, that's probably a good lesson for not just DD, but just in life. We all should practice that. Especially when someone cuts you off on the freeway. I have a hard time with that. Where I just need to say, look, I'm fine. That person, I don't know what was dealing with them, but I'm okay, and I need to just come off of this. Because at the end of the day, I remember there's another great thing that my dad used to say is he says, at the end of the day, your harsh feelings, if you hold on to them, they only wind up hurting you. They really don't hurt anybody else. You're the one that holds on to those horrible feelings and that resentment or anger or whatever it is that you have. And so if you go through that process, then it's easier to let it go. But that's a very important thing that I wanted to bring up, is that we're not trying to say that in this relationship, both of you don't have the right to feel something. I think some people think that that's, you know.
And I think this is a true statement on both sides of the coin, but don't let your feelings affect how you interact in your relationship. So on the wife's side, the submissive side, don't let your feelings in that moment allow you to become disrespectful or disobedient, because then that becomes a bigger issue, and then that becomes an issue that needs to be addressed through punishment or through accountability. And on the dominant side, on the husband's side, don't let your feelings create a situation where you are unnecessarily harsh.
You were going to say exactly what I was thinking. I probably should have said this, but I didn't remember it when we did the leadership podcast. But one of the things that Tony Dungy used to say is good leaders know when to keep their mouths shut and just plant their feet strongly to where everybody knows we're still going to do this. And so what I mean is and I think that's what you're just saying is don't say something or do something that then is going to hurt your spouse and make the situation worse. Just say, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to keep my mouth shut as the leader, but I'm still going to walk the direction we're going to go.
Right. I mean, using the scenario that we brought up, by not saying anything, letting me have my feelings, letting me have space to process my feelings, you really allowed me to either do the right thing or make my own mistake without your help.
Right, exactly. Because if there was a mistake going to be made, I was going to let you make it.
Because if you would have allowed your feelings and your reaction to create a situation where you would have responded harshly, yes, I am still in control of my response to your words, but it would have been a lot more difficult, and it would have set me up for failure. And I think so. And as my husband, you should be trying to create an atmosphere of success.
Exactly.
And then if I fail, then accountability, then punishment comes. Because you're saying, I gave you all the tools for success and you still fell short. So now you get the encouragement and motivation of accountability and of punishment to
learn from this.
To learn and to move forward with experience so that you do better next time.
Yeah. And again, you hit on this really good. Because if I had lost my cool, I ran the risk too of potentially losing some of that respect from you, because you're just like, geez, he just kind of prompted me.
I was about to say,
he kind of bullied me maybe a little bit, or he baited me. That's the word I'm looking for. He baited me.
And I was just going to say, if you would have lost your cool, then that's almost like you were trying to set me up to then take your frustration out on me through punishment. And then that's not a productive process
No.
at all for anyone.
And by the way, I don't want any dominant partners listening here as if like, well, man, he just did the right thing. No. I did the right thing in that moment because I've screwed it up a million times.
Like, he did the right thing this time.
Yeah. But there are times where, and I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Maybe you can, but there were some times when I've opened up my mouth, haven't I, and screwed the whole thing up.
Oh, yeah.
And if I had just kept my mouth shut, it would have. We would have been able to move on a lot easier.
There's a situation recently that I can think of.
I think I know what you're talking about. You can say it if you want.
We were having a disagreement on some parenting, a parenting situation, and you had told me I wouldn't go back in there talking about.
Oh, yeah. Okay, keep going.
And
I know what situation you're talking about here.
I did not take that as a directive of you telling me don't go back in there. So I went ahead and went back and to, check in with our daughter who was having a hard time. And then I came back and it ended up with us kind of, didn't have positive
More
results.
shots were fired.
Yeah, it didn't have positive results. And then you got mad at me and you were like, I told you not to go back in there. And I was just like shell shocked.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you weren't clear on that.
No, because she was right. The words that I used.
I wouldn't go back in there.
I wouldn't go back in there. I went back and looked and went, yeah. That was a jerky move because those were your exact words. You didn't tell her, don't go back in there. You told her, I probably wouldn't. How would she realize? And then I realized, yeah, I wound up looking like I had
and you
mud
were
all over my face.
extremely frustrated at me.
I was.
And that's why you kind of let into me a little bit.
It was not one of my finest moments. It was not.
I don't believe that any ramifications as far as like punishment happened after that.
No, because I was the one that was being a jackass.
We just chalked it up as like everybody mistakes were made on all sides.
On all sides, including our daughter.
And we just need to communicate and try to work through it without without specifically our domestic discipline dynamic so that we can just move forward.
And maybe we don't want to talk too much about that there because that sounds like another good podcast topic of when discipline maybe doesn't happen, or maybe when a situation calls for it where it's chalked up as a draw, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Just a thought, but yeah, I just wanted everybody to know that we want to not just give you the good on here, but the bad and the ugly. And in that situation, that was an ugly situation where I made the wrong call as the leader. I let my frustration get the best of me, and instead of taking that moment to play out the scenes in my mind like I did when we were going to Home Depot, I just went with the first thing that came into my mind. Guess what? That scene played out not the way I wanted, and I should have played it out in my mind first to realize, oh, that's not going to play out the way you want. So I try to do that more.
Teenagers are hard.
Yeah, and she's not even a teenager yet. We have a preteen, but many
she's
of you
close.
she's close, right? But many of you that have kids, you know what we're talking about. But so the point of all this is to say, take those moments when you're feeling disrespected, either side, and you have a moment to step back and figure out whether or not you are going to be disobedient in that moment, or if you're not going to be. And dominant partner, you've got an opportunity to say, okay, do I give her the ball and see what she's going to do in this moment? Or am I going to make the situation worse by taking that ball and really making it bad? And so
I was going to say just kind of a wrap up.
Wrapping it up, yeah.
Wrapping it up.
You probably say it better than I can, so wrap it up a little bit.
Okay, so the most ideal situation is to have a relationship where respect and admiration is is present so that obedience becomes a natural response to the respect you feel for your partner. However, there are going to be situations or times where that respect is not at the forefront, where you are going to be tempted to be more reactionary. And in those times, you still have the choice to be obedient, even if you are not feeling actively respectful. However, on the flip side, if you respect your partner, it's imperative that you do not actively and purposefully disobey them, because disobedience is a communication of a lack of respect. So if you are disobeying your partner with your actions, but you say you respect them, then you probably really need to do some introspection to really figure out if that is true, because if you are respecting them, you probably wouldn't be actively disobeying them in a purposeful, intentional way. And also, if you don't have a relationship where you can say there is an overarching respect that I have for my dominant partner, because even in the moments where I lose a little bit of respect, or there is a moment where maybe a little bit of trust is broken, Coda is still respectable. He is still trustworthy, even if that situation needs to be worked out, even if that moment needs to be rectified. That doesn't change who he is as a person and who he is in our relationship, because if he wasn't respectable, then I could not rebuild that respect. If he wasn't trustworthy, I could not rebuild that trust. And so if you have a partner that you're like, they're not respectable, they're not trustworthy, they're not all of these things that create an atmosphere where obedience and admiration is possible, then you really need to work on the relationship before you work on the domestic discipline. And so all that to say...
Well said, as always, by the way.
Thank you. So all that to say, if you lack respect for your partner, try to figure out, is this a temporary situation or is this an overarching theme of the relationship? If it's temporary, fake it till you make it to a certain extent. Choose obedience, even if you don't feel like it, because as soon as that situation is rectified, as soon as that situation has been moved on from, you will be in a good place in your relationship again. If the lack of respect is an overarching theme of your relationship, then pause your domestic discipline and really figure out your relationship first.
On both sides. That goes for both sides. If you're having disrespect on both sides, because don't forget, dominant partner, you can, just like we mentioned that scenario where with our daughter, I disrespected Arya by what I said and by the way I reacted.
And so, again, there is something to be said that if you are feeling a certain kind of way, you can choose obedience. And if you don't choose obedience, that's when you get yourself in trouble and you end up needing accountability.
This is why she does the blogging and not me, because she's a lot better spoken than I am. So, but I think you summed it up nicely.
Speaking of the blogging, our written blog, if you want to call it that, is exclusively on Patreon right now. If you want to read any of the written posts that I've made, link to the Patreon is down in the description box. Patreon also has exclusive Patreon-only podcast episodes.
Which, by the way, I had mentioned a couple of past podcasts that I'm going to do a short podcast, just me, kind of for the dominant partners and stuff. I've decided I'm going to do 2 a month, and I'm going to try to do the first one here, in the first 2 here in July. So those will be coming soon.
So, like I said, link to our Patreon is down in the description box if you want to learn more about that. If you want to email us, our email is down in the description box as well. As always, if you like this podcast, please give it a like here on YouTube. And if you are not yet subscribed, we would love it if you would.
That'd be great. And thank you to all of you who've already subscribed. It's just pretty awesome to continue to see that number grow. Gets us excited.
It does. It does.
So,
well, until
Did we do
next
it?
time. Yeah, I think so. I think we're
Okay.
good. All right, guys. See you next time.
bye.